Hey guys, and welcome to part 2 of this KDK list spotlight video, where we're still looking at KDK as a broad overview, but we're going to look at the archetypes and the things that, if you're playing a KDK army, the way in which you can maximize the competitiveness of your list. If you are planning to really give your friend a run for his money, or you're planning to attend something like a tournament, you want to be playing as competitive a list as you can. So what kind of archetypes will you be looking for if you're trying to get as much competitiveness out of KDK. So firstly, the first archetype, as we discussed in the previous video, the significance of Blood Tithe. To generate as many Blood Tithe points as you want as many units as you can get, which means spam of multiple small units. That's what MSU counts for. And things like the Gore Pack formation allow for this kind of spam. So, and the things that are featured in Gore Pack. So, specifically, I'm talking about the Chaos bikes with Mark of Khorne are an efficient unit. Bikes in general are quite an efficient unit. Khorne bikes are good because they're quick. They get to benefit from the Mark of Khorne more quickly than other models would. Models on foot like Berserkers or just Chaos Marines with Mark of Khorne will often take a few turns before the Mark of Khorne has any significance. Unlike the Mark of Nurgle, which is getting value straight away because it's making the models more tough, Mark of Khorne actually requires you to be getting in there. So that's why bikes get good benefit from the Mark of Khorne. And obviously Flesh Hounds, I've got the Flesh Hound unit profile here. Another very, very efficient unit choice. They're only 16 points per model. We can see here that they're 2 wound model, toughness 4, 2 attacks and initiative 4 as well, and weapon skill 5. These are also beasts, which means they have fleet, which is something that we will definitely be going into more detail about later. So just basically spamming out things like the Khorne bikes and Flesh Hounds is a really good way to generate Blood Tithe while putting really intense pressure on your opponent. The next archetype is the Deathstar archetype, where you basically have one big unit and you load it up with ICs, and that big unit will often win games on its own. I would say that the Flesh Hound Deathstar platform is the best Deathstar that Chaos have access to. It is only majority toughness 4, but it's very efficient. So definitely something to consider. So once again, the concept of that is you take a big unit of 20 Flesh Hounds, and that in its own is a really big boon because the footprint's so big. When you have a unit with a massive footprint, basically what it does is it allows you to kind of occupy a really large part of the board, which makes it very difficult for your opponents to run away from you. And then it also facilitates really effective multi-assaults because you've got so many models, makes achieving multi-assaults a lot easier. And once again, having fleet is really important. Fleet is a rule that requires all the models in your unit to have it. So units like when you've got your MSU Flesh Hounds, it's really easy to get benefit out of fleet. We will discuss ways to maximize value of fleet in a Deathstar very soon. When you're running something like, and it's worth noting that these two archetypes, while they can occur in a vacuum, they're not mutually exclusive. It is possible to run like a Khorne, Flesh Hound Deathstar with some allied ICs in it, while also spamming lots of bikes and Flesh Hounds. You can do that. And that's a way that I think is quite a good way to play this list, is to have lots of MSU units for pressure and for Blood Tithe generation, and then you have your Deathstar to actually get the job done in terms of confronting the enemy and getting rid of their power play. So what are some possible allies for this kind of archetype? If we're talking about either or all these archetypes. Firstly, Chaos Space Marines are a great ally. Sorcerers, just mind the heresy. Forgive the fact that I'm bringing up casters. But sorcerers they can join Khorne units. There's nothing that prevents them from doing that, and they're very, very efficient and welcome support. So sorcerers are good, firstly, because something like endurance is amazing on Flesh Hounds. Giving these Flesh Hounds 4-up FNP increases their survivability exponentially, doubles it potentially. It also gives Eternal Warrior, which means their 2 wounds are always going to be relevant. You're not going to get them ID'd by Strength 8 stuff or Force or anything like that. And also having Endurance and having that 4-up FNP over the star and all the characters in the star also alleviates your Blood Tithe expenditure. You're not going to be needing to pop that FNP. Means you can save your Blood Tithe for summons. Furthermore, if you do roll up something like Cursed Earth, it makes your invulns better on your demons. And it also means that when you do summon, you're not going to scatter, which is very significant as well, because there's nothing worse than summoning a unit and having a mishap occur, because you've saved up Blood Tithe, you've used them, and if you do get a mishap, you get no value. So having Cursed Earth for those accurate deep strikes is also really important. So sorcerers are something you want to be leaning on as allies in a kind of a KDK army, especially a Deathstar focused army. The next thing to discuss is just the option of the new Black Legion Cyclopia Cabal, which is a formation where you get between 3 and 5 sorcerers. They get a special spell called Shrouded Deceit. Shrouded Deceit, what it does is it's a 3 Warp Charge Malediction, and what it does is it allows you to use the enemy unit you cast it on. You can shoot with that enemy unit in your own shooting phase. So if you cast that on a Storm Surge, you can shoot with a Storm Surge in your shooting phase, which is obviously insanely powerful if you're targeting on a good shooting unit. It's powerful for multiple reasons. It overcomes some of the disadvantages that KDK have, which is that limited heavy support, limited shooting options. And you do also, the rule for this is that for every Psyker within 12 of the casting model, part of the formation, you get a free warp charge to use on Shrouded Deceit. So if you have 3 or 4 Psykers in the formation, you'll get 3 to 4 free warp charge to use towards casting this warp charge 3 spell, which means very often you're going to have enough dice to cast other stuff as well. So it's not going to use your whole pool of dice to cast it. So this is a very powerful formation that does supplement the KDK Deathstar very well. It's also worth noting that Chaos Space Marines bring in Havocs. Autocannon Havocs, I've discussed this before in some Breaking the Meta videos, are a very efficient heavy support option with their Strength 8 autocannons. The next thing you want to think about is if you are doing Chaos Space Marines, Crimson Slaughter supplements good, almost specifically, just for their relics. Demon Heart's really powerful. It's the only way to get a 2-up armor save on a non-special character Chaos model. 2-up armor save is really good, especially if it's on a Chaos Lord or Juggernaut. The extra wound, having the extra wound, and the extra, armor save. 2-up save on 4 wounds, as we know from your kind of tank commanders and Space Marines, is really valuable. The next thing to note is the Balestar of Manon is another relic that can be taken in Crimson Slaughter. It's a special spell familiar, so you're taking it on a sorcerer. It counts as a spell familiar. It does not allow the sorcerer to deny the witch, which is significant if you have a level 3 sorcerer, because often you will be wanting to be using that sorcerer to deny the witch. But it lets the sorcerer roll in divination. So what does divination give? I mean, I've got this down here as well. Divination options would be things like Prescience for the rerolls. Then you get obviously Forewarning, which is a 4-up invulnerable save, so it kind of functions in the same way as Cursed Earth would function. It's also worth noting that it can be cast on any friendly unit within, I believe it's 24 inches. So you can actually cast that on something like Bloodthirster if you summon it to give it a 4-up invuln if you want to make it more survivable. And also you have the option of Misfortune. Misfortune for Flesh Hounds is really good, especially with their Furious Charge, because on Strength 5, if you have Rending, you can actually mathematically glance AB 14. So it gives you potential for AP 2, and also technically lets you harm AB 14. So it gives you very good reach on your Flesh Hounds. So that's worth noting. So the Balestar Manon is something to keep in mind. And lastly, if you're taking allies, Cypher, and I alluded to him earlier, Cypher is really important in a kind of any Deathstar. Having hit and run is very powerful. It allows you options and win conditions you would never have had. So hit and run, really good. Shrouded is really good as well. Giving your Flesh Hounds, if they're in cover, like even as little as just being obscured, going from a 5-up, taking your 5-up demon save, going to a 3-up cover save is really, really effective. It makes your Flesh Hounds way, way, way more survivable, which is very important, and it's almost impossible to state how important that is for your Deathstar. So moving on from Cypher, let's kind of look at the linchpin ICs. So we've got Cypher first as a linchpin IC you would want if you're actually creating this Flesh Hound Deathstar. Cypher has fleet, So we know that, you know, the Flesh Hounds have fleet, Cypher has fleet as well. So he's offering his hit and run and shrouded. It's Cypher in combat. He does have some AP2 attacks because he fires his pistols in combat. Because Cypher will generally be at the back of your unit, you'll be trailing back some Flesh Hounds to keep in coherency with Cypher. Normally, if you have a slow model, you can challenge with the slow model to pull the slow model into combat. But Cypher can't challenge because you're always going to have Khorne Lords, you know, your Chaos Lords. They're going to be having to challenge. So Cypher will very rarely be actually contributing to the combat because he's going to be at the back of the unit and his pylons won't be enough to get him in. So yeah, we've basically just got him in the unit for hit and run and shrouded, which is definitely a force multiplying rules that make him very worth it. The next thing is Chaos Lords and Juggernauts. Juggernauts effectively do make your Khorne Lords competitive. They give them what they need to push them up to those kind of that chapter master level. The extra survivability is very valuable, as is the extra attack. So everything that the Juggernauts offer is valid. And once again, this is much probably underrated and unknown. The Cavalry special rule also gives you fleet. So far we have, you know, we've got the Khorne Dogs with fleet, we've got Cypher with fleet, and we've got the Chaos Lords with fleet. So it is possible to get a fleet Deathstar, which is something that is very, I guess, rare and underrepresented in the metagame. So being able to get a whole Deathstar with fleet, for those that are unaware, fleet lets you reroll your charge, or to start with, it lets you reroll your run range. It also lets you reroll your charge range when assaulting, both dice or just one dice. And I think the second part of it, being able to selectively just reroll one dice, is what makes fleet so immense. You might have an 8-inch charge range and you roll your dice and you get a 6 and a 1. So you roll a 7 and you fail. With fleet, you can pick up the 1 and reroll that and keep the 6. So fleet is an incredibly powerful way at making sure you make combat. So the next kind of linchpin ICs, as I discussed earlier, you've got your sorcerers. Sorcerers obviously bring things like, as I discussed, endurance. Biomancy also offers enfeeble, which is a very good offensive spell to debuff your opponent's units. Cursed Earth as well, and obviously I discussed the divination options. However, it is worth noting that sorcerers are the only ICs that I've discussed thus far that do not have fleet. So unfortunately, and this is the only, which is a very interesting little mechanic, they can roll up warp speed. I'm pretty sure warp speed gives you fleet. So a sorcerer that rolls warp speed will have fleet and will contribute the fleet to the unit. But unless you are lucky enough to roll that spell, your sorcerers will not have fleet, which will mean that very often they will be the difference between your Dog Deathstar having fleet and not having fleet. So I can definitely understand players leaving the sorcerers at home purely to guarantee that their Deathstars will maintain fleet. The other option is to just not have the sorcerer in the unit, to have him kind of in a supporting unit, but that's kind of makes him very vulnerable to just being killed. So while sorcerers are an incredibly powerful force multiplier, I can also totally understand why people might choose not to have them, because the sorcerers will lose the unit fleet. The last unit, and if you kind of do leave your sorcerer at home, because you kind of say, well, I actually want fleet, then you go with a Herald with the Loci of Wrath, because what the Loci of Wrath does is it gives you hatred. So it's the equivalent to having, in some ways, the Balestar Manon with Prescience. So having those rerolls over a huge unit with lots of kind of, beat sticks. You've got your AP2 and AP3 beat sticks with your Chaos Lords. The Herald himself is powerful with the AP3 weapon. And, if you're hitting with all these furious charged dogs, having rerolls to hit is extremely good. So guys, that's basically my overview. The conclusions of this overview are that KDK is a powerful book because it allows you, it overcomes those weaknesses that we discussed of Chaos. You lose the instability, you can create a Deathstar. Blood Tithe rewards your MSU that's already good. Flesh Hound and Bike MSU is already a powerful unit, kind of distribution of units. Them generating Blood Tithe is a powerful ability, which then you can, consolidate all of this with the big Deathstar that benefits from having all these ICs that allows you to create a fleet Deathstar. So, For that reason, I feel like this unit is one of the better ones that are available to Chaos. I actually don't think Chaos can craft a better Deathstar than this Khorne Dog Fleet Deathstar. I think the only kind of competing Deathstar would be probably a Nurgle Bike Star with just toughness 6 and 2-up jinking with Cypher. So that's a unit that I ran at a recent tournament. I had the 2-up jinx with Cypher. It's also a really good unit, but I think what pushes the Khorne Dog unit over the edge is just it's got a way bigger footprint. The footprint is way bigger, and you get fleet. I lost. I performed well with that list, but I lost a game because I failed an 8-inch charge. If you have fleet, failing an 8-inch charge becomes a lot less likely. So I do really, really feel like this is a powerful archetype. So now that's the end of part 2. Let's go into part 3 and actually have a look at Jared's list and see how he's incorporated these kind of power plays into his army list. So thanks for watching part 2, guys. Stay tuned. Cheers.